I'm honored to be joined by Steve Baughman for the second time to talk about Ravi Zacharias and an inside scoop on the spa allegations. Thank you for joining me once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Paul.
Sure. And can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? Because you're a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer. I do immigration law. My practice is mainly political asylum from the Chinese community. So I represent a lot of Christians and Muslims from the People's Republic of China who are in the U.S. and claim that they're fearful of going back due to persecution. So that's my main line of work. I've been doing it. Been a lawyer almost right around 30 years now. And I'm doing it part-time. I do a lot of music also, and part-time graduate student, and I'm a full-time dilettante.
I wanted to ask if you found any allies in the Christian community before this full investigation came out.
Yeah, there were some really good folks early on who were open-minded and courageous and concerned about the credential fraud. There were some Christian scholars in Canada, some bloggers here in the U.S., but not more than a handful. I mean, I'm thinking of maybe 4 or 5 people who early on came out and said, this doesn't look good. Ravi's been dishonest about his credentials and we should take that seriously. And they weren't nationally prominent people, and they were roundly ignored.
It was a few years ago when I was in seminary during that time when the credentials fraud, or whatever you want to call it, came out. And I remember, I think my professor in passing noted that. And I since then, I kind of knew about it, and I had a little bit less respect for Ravi, but I guess thanks for that, because you helped uncover that part of his life.
Well, what was really disturbing about that whole thing is that one of the people who supported what I was doing early is a Canadian theologian named John Stackhouse, who says that he'd been worried for 20 years that evangelicals were going to be confronting Ravi, or he'd been worried 20 years that this news was going to be coming out about Ravi's credentials. So, he's in the scene and was paying attention. And so apparently evangelicals have known for a long time about Ravi's credential fraud, but just didn't do anything about it. As far as I've been able to ascertain, not a single Christian spoke out on his credential fraud, and he did this for decades. 0. I was the first one to publicly speak out about it. And that is, I think, something that I hope the Christian community looks at and says, how the hell did that happen? How did it take someone from outside to say, hey, this is not cool? And I'm still baffled by that.
Sure.
Because it was obvious, it was very clear. All you had to do was check Ravi's website and see that he was lying about stuff, especially for those of his colleagues who are in academic life. They would have known, and they chose not to say anything. Very, very upsetting and revealing.
I wanted to talk about who you see was most involved, or the main players in the cover-up. I think in the last interview you mentioned RZIM. Were there other players?
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole lineup of good old boys in the Southern Baptist Convention, for instance, who knew about this stuff and were determined not to let Ravi look bad. You have Pastor Mac Brunson at the First Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, just a few weeks after Ravi did his NDA with Lorianne Thompson, paid money for that NDA, that non-disclosure agreement, and refused to talk about his sexual online activity. Mac Brunson awarded Ravi a lifetime ministry award at the his mega church in Jacksonville, Florida. Pastor Brunson knew very well what was going on with Ravi, and he just wanted it to not get public. And Paige Patterson knew about Ravi. He's a big shot in the Southern Baptist world, and the whole industry. Anyone with eyes to see would have been able to see that Ravi Zacharias had been dishonest about his credentials, and that there was something really fishy about that lawsuit he filed in 2017, which he then dismissed for a non-disclosure agreement and refused to talk about. Innocent preachers don't do that, right?
Mm.
If you've been the victim of an extortion plot by a married couple out of Canada, you don't do it. You don't give up your right to defend yourself. You fight. You get the truth out. And Ravi did exactly the opposite. Oh, Paige Patterson, I've heard some stuff about Paige on the inside that I can't talk about just yet, but it'll come out eventually that Paige knew a lot about Ravi and just didn't want it to come out.
Well,
yeah.
And I know there's a new video out there, a lady who's talking about her experience with Rabbi, and she's not supposed to. Have you had contact with her or any of the victims?
Yeah, you're probably talking about Lori Ann Thompson.
Yes.
She and her husband were Christians. Her husband was struggling as a Christian, and so they became interested in his ministry, and they wound up meeting him in Ontario, in Canada, and she and Ravi started an email relationship, and eventually it turned into Ravi asking her for, and there was this grooming process going on where he used his spiritual authority to cultivate a certain kind of relationship with her, and then they moved into a more intimate level, and he eventually asked her for sexual photos, and then when she finally decided this is enough, she felt really guilty. I'm going to confess it to my husband. Ravi sent his now famous suicide email saying, "If you tell Brad, I will bid this world goodbye." So, so I made it a point not to have any phone calls with the Thompsons during the litigation, because I wanted a full record of everything we talked about, but I've had a few phone calls with them since. And yeah, they've been shocking episodes of mistreating another human being I've ever heard of in my 30 years as a lawyer. It wasn't violent. I'm not talking about violent things, but Ravi got caught doing something online sexually that he wasn't supposed to be doing. And rather than confess, he huddled with his lawyers and his PR people, and they decided, let's make up this plot about this couple deciding to pimp Lori Ann in order to extort money out of Ravi. That was the story they came up with. It was absolutely false. We now know it was absolutely false, but Ravi went with that story. They made it public, and they absolutely destroyed this Christian couple, all for the sake of preserving Ravi's reputation. And Ravi went to his death never retracting that story. That is really one of the most blood-curdling things a preacher can do. And God's great apologist, Ravi Zacharias, did exactly that. Vicious.
Wow. And you did mention you have an inside scoop, but you can't talk to the public yet. But is there anything else that you can talk to us about that the public wouldn't know?
I didn't want to make a big deal out of the Paige Patterson thing. I'm in touch with people, and I hear stuff, and there's going to be in a year or two, we'll know a lot more about the institutional cover-ups. There are people with troves of emails and troves of communication between the big evangelical power players behind the scenes who are working to keep the Ravi reputation good because it would have hurt the brand. But I was contacted. The really big thing for me was a few days after Ravi died in May of 2020. I was contacted by a woman who said that that Ravi had owned a spa where she worked, and that he had been a sexual pervert, and that she had been bullied and mistreated by him, and she was afraid of Ravi, and she decided that now she needs peace of mind, and she wanted to share this with me. She didn't want money. She didn't want fame. And this was the first I'd ever heard about the massage spas. And I looked into her story, it checked out. And then I was able to speak to Ravi's business partner in the firm's, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Anurag Sharma. And he confirmed with me that, yep, they were in the spa business. And Mr. Sharma had to shut one of the spas partly because of the way Ravi was treating the women. So I broke this story in a YouTube video on September. And then Christianity Today, a Christian colleague and I, a guy named Jim Beverly, a good Christian scholar up at Canada, he was involved with me in interviewing these witnesses. The first woman who contacted me, Mr. Sharma, and another woman who had worked in the spas and described Ravi exposing himself and being sexual and all that. But we decided to give the story to Christianity Today because it would get a better play than if it came from, the friendly banjo atheist. So Christianity Today waited a little longer than I wanted because they were doing a thorough investigation. So I posted my video and that got a lot of coverage. And then a few weeks later, they came out with a really good, thorough story where they located more witnesses than I'd been able to locate. And the story's gone viral since. And now the world knows that Ravi Zacharias was an out-of-control sexual predator, in addition to being a pathological career-long liar. And the scary thing about the whole thing for me, Paul, is if that woman had not contacted me to share this information, we would never have known about the spa story. Like I think I mentioned in my last video, with my last interview with you, Ravi would be on his way to sainthood right now. They'd be building statues in his honor at conservative seminaries around the US. But because that woman decided, I need to get this off my chest. And she also mentioned that she really wanted to help the Lori Ann Thompson because she knew when she read about Lori Ann Thompson's experience with Ravi that it was true. And if she hadn't done that, how different the world would be right now in the evangelical scene.
Wow.
We came scary close to never knowing anything about Ravi's extensive sexual perversions. And now, of course, the information's come out and he was abusing women in Asia. He had nude photos on his cell phone. He had amorous exchanges with the women. He was using ministry money to pay them, just out of control. And this is the tip of the iceberg. One of the big stories that I'm interested in on the spa thing is Ravi had brought women over from Asia to work the spas. I don't know how you do that. I'm an immigration lawyer. I suspect that the way they managed to make that happen was to lie to the U.S. immigration authorities about what these women were coming over for. Because it's just really hard to get a visa as a massage therapist. They probably misled the U.S. immigration by saying these women are coming over in some sort of important managerial capacity or as religious workers. And I really hope someone looks into that, because this would indicate not just Ravi wouldn't have done that on his own. There would have been people in his organizations who were knowingly lying to the immigration authorities to bring women over to Asia for what they knew was Ravi's sexual gratification, or at least Ravi's desire to be alone in a massage booth with this woman for whatever the reason was. So there's some pretty big piles of documents out there that give us a paper trail to show that Ravi wasn't acting alone in this. Mm-hmm. And I hope someone follows up on that.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned in the last interview how you grew up surrounded kind of by Christian missionaries. And can you speak into a bit the contrast that you saw? You said you really had a high respect for Christians. Those missionaries, with what you see happening within modern evangelicalism and cult-like tendencies, or our celebrity culture, our brand making, brand preserving, can you speak into what we need to learn from Christians around the world?
Yeah, I feel a little awkward doing that because I'm an outsider telling you guys how to run things, and I don't really want to be doing that.
Sometimes that's the best.
I think there are some awkward things. This celebrity culture is really great for business and really bad for religion. So you guys have to decide, what do you want? What's more important? A really cool, sexy brand that brings the butts to the pews and that sells the books and puts money in the coffers, or the kind of stuff that the guy you claim to follow would have been wanting you to do with your lives? Clearly the mega churches, the publishing houses, the seminaries, the apologetics businesses have decided that the brand is more important than the religion. That success in the apologetics and the Christian evangelical marketplace is more important than the principles of the religion. I can't see it any other way. There are good people working in impoverished villages all over the world on behalf of Jesus Christ and on behalf of the church, but the big evangelical scene, that's not their priority. They have priorities that are a lot more like the priorities that the Roman Catholic Church had with its sex scandal. Cover it up at all costs. If that means lying about the victims, if that means re-injuring, re-abusing the victims, if that means hiring lawyers to scare people, we do all of that, and we deny until we can no longer deny. And then we talk about how terribly sorry we are about this, right? That's the playbook that evangelical Christianity is using. No question about that. And
Wow.
You guys have to decide how many heads you want to have rolling amongst your leadership. I can't do anything about that. I don't think a whole lot is going to change. I think, today I learned that Christian Missionary Alliance, which was Ravi's denomination, has defrocked him, possibly implemented now a system of greater accountability where their local pastors have to report to various people locally to keep the system cleaner. I'm happy to see stuff like that happening, but there needs to be some real serious self-reflection amongst the evangelical world about how this stuff happens so often. And Ravi Zacharias is a beautiful example, a beautiful teaching opportunity, because he did it in such an open and notorious way that anyone with eyes to see should have been able to see it. And a lot of people did see it, and they chose, instead of to turn the other cheek, they turned the other way.
Sure.
And cosmetic changes aren't gonna help right now. It's got to be some real fundamental evaluation of the whole values that evangelical Christianity has embraced. So, in my opinion, but no one's hiring me as a consultant for the church. So, and I wouldn't want to be anyway.
Sure. I want to thank you for these enriching answers, and for what you've done, once again, for what you've done in this. And a lot of evangelicals are hurting, but we need to face the reality. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me on, Paul, and thanks for sharing this story. I think it's an important one. So good luck to you.
Too.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Blessings.